Welcome back to the Sidebar, a book club for chuds. I'm David, and I'm joined by...
I'm Gabe, hi.
I'm Capitalissimo. You can call me Cap, because you're not going to say the whole thing.
All right, and today we're all gathered back to discuss the 2019 short story collection, The Last Free Man, written by Lewis Woolston, published by Truth Serum Press. And what do we know about this Woolston guy?
Yeah, so the background of Lewis Woolston is, as it's presented in the notes, is obviously completely fictionalized because he says that he's from the setting of these short stories, which is a place called Australia, which is of course a reference to Austria, maybe Australasia, but it seems to be some sort of vast featureless desert with nothing but truck stops and truckers and occasional areas of scrub and brush. It's completely absent of hope and absolutely lacks any sort of urban features. It's all the urban areas seem to be in a nether space from the perspective of this setting, where they're sort of not defined well, and everyone seems to be fleeing them for quote-unquote the bush. And we never see the bush, so it makes me think it's sort of referring to a region. I don't know if he develops this setting in his other book, because this is his debut, but this is Australia as it's presented by Lewis
Yeah,
Woolston.
I think he ripped off Dune in the setting, to be honest.
I think he might have. There's definitely some Frank Herbert vibes in the setting, but there's not an overarching religious theme. When there's certainly no themes of imperialism in this. It's more of a down-to-earth, scrappy day-to-day sort of story.
Yeah, having the gay best friend being hooked on spice was a little bit on the nose.
True.
Yeah, very Sanderson-esque imaginary animals as well. I'm sure there's a whole wiki for these kangaroos and such. But seriously, we've all read the book now from cover to cover. It's a series of 19 short stories with no direct connection between all of them, just broadly on the subject of being a wanderer, being an outsider, and specifically taking place in Australia. A lot of it centering on the roadhouses, which are sort of these combination gas station, repair shop, and like your only source of supplies for 100 miles in any direction when you're way out in the deeps of the bush. And a lot of it specifically taking place in the Nullarbor region, which I don't know Australian geography well at all.
Oh, it's south. I looked up. I have a map right here. Yeah.
Okay. So down close to the pole, and and I have a lot of thoughts about the book. Overall, very much enjoyed it. I have I guess some more complicated, made some criticisms and some things I really want to call out that I enjoyed. But what were your guys, I guess, high level impressions of it?
I read this over a span, like in spurts, basically. I was on a trip when I read this. And for me, it's very much a vibe-based book rather than a detail-based book. You get a sense of Australian culture, or it's very much a heavily romantic TM version of Australia, or like a romanticist view of Australia, rather than, because this is my only exposure to Australia other than fucking Bluey and like Walden. So it was very interesting in that sense. For me, it's very much a sentimental overview of his life, and in a way, like a folk history of Australia, and like a snapshot of basically his background, his culture, and his kind of fantasy of kind of being free. It's all the reason why it's called The Last Free Man. The whole story is all about exits, right? You have everyone hugging the coasts of Australia, and you have the inward bush, right? I'll get into detail as we go on, but overall, I'd say it's very much a fantastical, self-vokish history of himself, really.
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of a it's a little subaltern in the sense that everyone who is in these stories is, according to the author, a loser, because it's all people who have basically washed out of polite society, and through either temperament or drug abuse or what have you, have just decided that the best way to move forward for them is to basically remove themselves and have this sort of wandering kind of very transient lifestyle in these roadhouses.
Yeah, he even uses the term Fellowship of
Right.
Exiles, I think, in the second or third story, Fellowship of Outsiders, something like that.
Yeah, even in reference to an animal, the last Medora Brumby. So I'd read this book a while ago. I was planning to read like one or two stories, and I'm reading about half of it just to refresh myself. And yeah, the quote unquote last free man himself refers to, you know, like a kinship with the horse, the last dying horse of the Brumbies, Australian Brumbies. Yeah, and I had a similar reaction to you guys. Like I have never read. I don't think I've read anything set in Australia. Actually, funny enough, fiction, which
Which of course
is odd.
Which of course, because Australia is entirely fictional, anything you would have read set in Australia would be fiction.
Yeah, this is not. I haven't read any of the extended Woolston verse. You know, yeah, but overall, I guess the flow of the stories. Well, actually, I guess let's do a spoiler free wrap up here. Is there anything I guess you guys would tell someone that maybe pop this video open, they've heard of The Last Free Man, debating checking it out? Is it a uniform recommend? Any qualifiers you'd give? And then I guess we'll give people a chance to bow out if they're just checking out. They click this to learn about that.
The most succinct way I'd put it is you meet this guy you talked to for like 3 times before. You're at a party. He somehow takes out a CD. Apparently still has CDs. He plays like The Cure, you know, and he starts rambling about his life and how important it is to him. And you can barely hear the song in the background, but he's very intentionally talking about it, but you can barely remember himself. But you can feel he himself is experiencing deep emotional reverence to this nostalgic period of his time in his life. And you can feel like the emotion, the intentional romanticism of it, but it's only little whispers and embers. It's not an actually in-depth experience. Instead of kissing the moment, you're only trailing your fingers on it. So in that sense, I think it's basically kind of, if you relate to him, you'll love it. But if you want anything more in-depth or technical, it's not that much of in your course, to say it nicely.
I would probably just tell someone that it has kind of the vibe of the classic alt film Clerks, but it's set in a fake place called Australia.
That's actually the best way to describe it.
Yeah, because it's intelligible, Gabe. Got him.
Like,
Hey, listen.
word cells blown out.
Well, yes, it's a reference because he always, there's like 3 stories where it ends with him listening to either a fucking, what is it? Either a Kiss a CD or a Smith CD.
You mean
I
Cure?
never thought
Cure.
about that. You're right.
Yeah, Cure. Sorry.
No, for real though, it did. Reading a couple of these stories did make me go listen to some Morrissey again, and still holds up. Solid bangers.
Yeah, I died to that. Yeah, and my summary, I think it would be similar. I think I described when I wrote a quick review of it was, it kind of had the writing style is character focused. It's not scenery focused. It's short stories, so they vary in terms of who they're covering, and so there's a little bit of a lack of connectivity there. But overall, I'd say if you're interested in the topic and you don't mind a writing style that's more, I think I called it Maugham-esque, but certain that kind of quick, clippy writing style, people-oriented, that I actually flows really well. It makes for a good page turner, but I did have an issue with this in terms of the sort of the superstructure. So yeah, obviously, bow out now if you don't want to be spoiled.
It's a breezy read. I think breezy is both the term we're looking for. It's very breezy.
You can definitely read this in a single day. Yeah.
Like I said, 1 or 2 sittings comfortably. Or this is actually probably the perfect airplane book.
God, yeah. For sure.
Yeah, this would be a great read. You probably read it between the 2 trips.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Okay, the real reason I brought us all together to discuss this is to make my proposal to rewrite this book in a different way. So here's, allow me to put out the diagram. So across all the short stories, there's kind of like 3 categories the way I see it. There's the clerk's roadhouse worker sequence. And before we started recording, Cap, you had mentioned that there's even a reference between two of these to the same character.
Right, yeah. Jimmy Healy exists in a couple of the stories. He's a grizzled old...
Yeah, the titular
he's a
freeman.
Grizzled old fellow who's lived his whole life in the bush and doesn't have a whole lot to show for it, but is definitely not upset with his lot in life, and is very happy to have lived this sort of roustabout life.
And so of the 19 stories, 8 or 9 or so are sort of the same male, about the same-ish age, like a Gen Xer or so. And he, like, and someone who knows Jim Healy and someone who doesn't, but he always reads, he likes sci-fi novels, and he works in a roadhouse or is like between roadhouse jobs. That's about a third of the stories, or a little more. And then another third or so of the stories is a police or outlaw vibe. There's like a manhunt, and it's you're either following I think you follow the cops in 2 of them, or you follow the guy being hunted in 2 or 3 of them. So that's sort of another sequence. And then there's like a sort of a smorgasbord of I call it the towny chapters typically. There's the exile, the woman who sort of just ended up in a nowhere town and her family's left her. There's a couple like just random guys driving places. Anyway, so my thesis is sort of the missing link with this book is I think he should have made this into a novel that followed the roadhouse worker and maybe had like a B plot following the outlaw or something like that. Because that was my main complaint reading through. I really enjoyed almost every story. There were, I think, 2 that I highlighted that I think fell flat. But yeah, my main thing I keyed in was, why didn't you just make it a novel that followed? Because obviously there's the same guy or inspired by the same guy. He's sort of a Woolston stand-in for at least a third, if not more, of the novel. But
I see what you're saying, and yeah, you can't actually draw the protagonist in most of these stories is he has different names, but he's always kind of the same guy, right? Which is kind of appears to be pretty heavily based on the author. There are various outcomes that would not work together, right? So it's very clearly different. But I agree that the parts are there that it could have been sort of turned into a novel over many years, right? That covers a many-year time frame.
Yeah, I fully concur. I genuinely do think he should have kind of focused on one or the other, because the themes kind of are as scattered as the roadhouses across the plains in a sense. Like, because you can tell, like, he has a lot of passion in, like, the roadhouse stories. You can tell there's a very deep connection there. But the pseudo-crime parts just do not have the fangs on them to really be entertaining as, like, pulp stories. And either make it a full-blown novel and try to connect the 2 together in a harmonious kind of collision, or just keep the clerk-esque kind of slacker going out into the bush, exit over society, go for a Jack Kerouac kind of thing, and save the the crime one for a separate novel instead of trying to have your cake and eat it too kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you could have had them both, but just I think just need more interstitial connection between them in a few spots, and the order would change, of course. So. Yeah, in my fan fiction version of this, which is in progress, Driftwood is actually the sort of crescendo, is sort of the 2/3. What do they call it in Save the Cat? That that whatever those terms are. Like Driftwood, that's the one where he he meets the girl and they like
Helen.
Yeah, Helen. They fall in love, get married. Like to me, that's a great climax. And then maybe he ends up turning into the old guy that gets the prostitute in Tracy's Lament. And that's sort of like a dark ending, or you could have a lighter ending and Tracy's Lament happens to someone else. Anyway, all to say, I have all sorts of, that's a good bully head.
I think Tracy's
theories.
Lament is mostly I don't necessarily think that like the lazy infidelity guy in Tracy's Lament. I think the whole point of, I actually thought that him getting the prostitute was a little tonally strange, because I think the main point of that short story, and yeah, it would have worked better if it was in a novel, right? But because it was in a short story, I think it distracted from the central theme of Tracy's lament, which to me was sort of the survivor's guilt of getting your shit together, right? Because he had all of these like fuck up friends in a flop house who were incredibly close. Like they were just unbelievably close to each other because they had absolutely nothing other than the other people who were in that situation with them. And he left to get this gig that was, at a roadhouse or some other similarly gig-ish job. And he ended up staying and just enjoying it. And he never went back. And everyone that he left ended up just continuing to descend further into poverty and depravity, and eventually he sees Tracy as a vagrant, completely blasted out of her mind on years of drug abuse, and the only thing that she can do is scream, "You left us, you left us, you never came back, you left us." And I think that the moral turpitude of the character in mentioning that he would, be unfaithful it was just like tonally odd, right? And didn't really add to the central theme. So.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
What would y'all say is the central theme of this book?
I don't think that, it's slice of life to me. I see it as slice of life.
Oh, those are the best parts, obviously.
And I would just say it's sort of feeling like of the down, views of the downtrodden, and it just I guess trying to capture the roadhouse stuff in particular, capturing that outcast, the outcast view of society.
Right.
The drifter, the vagrant, the like. You get a sense of his fantasy of Australia.
He's never like a homeless addict in these things. He's always a guy who's like a guy who has a shitty job. Like he, in one story, he is working at a liquor store in a nowhere fucking town just so that he can get the money together to fix a car to finish driving across the country. So this dude is broke ass poor. This dude has no money, but he hasn't fallen completely by the wayside. So he's just got this very marginal kind of income and ability to support himself. And that's sort of like the economic strata that everyone in these stories occupies.
Right. The car is a item of escape. It's out of happiness. All the happy endings or like the sweet endings happen in cars. Driftwood ends with probably it hits a little harder than the other stories, or it hits more fresh, right? All the happiness involves cars and traveling. It's like a happy version of Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. You can call this the Australian archipelago, basically, because the roadhouses, you see these tiny dots in this giant plain wasteland. And I looked up pictures of the Narabu, or wherever the Narabar. Right? It's nothing but a complete flat plain, and it ends in like a cut-off clip. You just see the water. When he describes in the first story just the absolute nothingness and how hard it is to like adjust yourself to it, but you kind of get addicted to it. And the concept of addiction, right? It's a story based on exit, right? Australia. You want a sense of the Australian ethic, or from a Spenglerian standpoint?
Had to be once, right? Had to be once. You had to mention Spengler.
Yes, I've been off my Spengler streak. I'm saying Australia is defined by exit. It's defined by a colonial sense of need and want. Economically, spiritually, the first two stories, right? Look at the beginning story, The Last Free Man, right? The whole point is that the unnamed main protagonist meets this veteran, this Vietnam veteran. And the two bookending stories, this and Grandpa Bob, both involved veterans of two different wars and two different kinds of men, but the same kind of archetype of the Australian working class, dare I say, native, like British stock and Australian man. Right? You look at this, and you see it's all about extraction. The Jimmy, he felt most in his life during Vietnam. he goes out to get the assault rifle, the AK-47. So they go to this grave. When I looked it up, sadly, the guy who's the grave's named after is a real person. But sadly, the particular grave, the whole concept of lonely graves, that's actually determined in Australia, by the way. You find these lonely graves scattered all over Australia, right? Just a single tomb and nothing else. It's quite kind of beautiful, actually. But you see that when he comes back, he has this like Bronze Age mindset kind of revelation, where he says, you come back and you expect to work in your suburbs and get a job and have some kitties and get henpecked, right? Get longhoused, right? And then he says, you know what? No, I refuse. He chooses exit. He chooses the bush. Same thing with most of Roadhouse is it's a safety zone. It's Babylon. It's not Babylon. It's Byzantium. It's a place of escape. You escape to the bush, right? You get a new life. Helen, right? She turns into the woman he marries, right? Helen in the Driftwood. Right? She's a hoe, right? She's a bogey, right? Which is a Australian slang for kind of a ghetto. And she turns into a trad wife, covered in sheep shit, from what our female friend says. But she's happy, and she feels a native. The 5th generation on this land is her son, right? She says the 5th generation. This sense of roots, right? You leave, you escape the decay of, like, the main city is Adelaide. It's the most popular city in Australia, And Woolston describes it as like a coffin, right? Or as an open-air graveyard. And also the problem with Woolston's style is, the way I'd say his style is, he's basically, you get a statue, right? You have this figure of romanticism, both in the negative Gothic sense and in the classical sense, right? Which is his experience as an Australian man. You see a statue, and what Woolston does with his style is he kind of runs his fingers across the statue, but doesn't get any more deeper. He doesn't, for example, kiss the statue. You don't feel the coldness. You don't understand the coldness of a marble statue until you actually kiss it. And it's a very beautiful thing.
You want to feel the kiss?
Yes. No, when I was in Boston, actually, I did that. It was overlooking a graveyard. It was the Athenia Library in Boston. It was
you
very
made out with someone's grave monument?
What the fuck?
No. The basement of the library has a window, and the window overlooks the graveyard. And you see his beautiful Hellenic, like young 20th peak Apollonian figure, his statue, this head, and you're looking over to the graveyard. And I was reading Dostoevsky in this beautiful, beautiful ancient library, and it just overwhelmed me. And you feel the marble on your lips.
Okay, so you were in the basement of the library, right? And you got
Athenia.
And you got aroused by a statue.
Dude, the Gabe lore keeps getting deeper.
And you went full Pygmalion. You made out with the statue.
It was
nice.
Yes, he was my Galatia. All right, that's absolutely correct. It was my Pygmalion moment, right? It was just something so beautiful, and you see this death in this old ancient town that's decayed, and this one figure of youth. It's just, again, that's how he reviews his life in the bush, right? Him and Helen, right? What does Helen say in End of Driftwood? Yeah, we'll end up being in the suburbs. We're not going to set the world on fire, but we'll always remember, our gay best friend in the back seat, the Smiths in the radio, and all of our shit in the trunk. Right, that's what she says. That's how he reviews his life. But he doesn't kiss the statue. He just runs his fingers across it. Because when he describes the opening monologue of Jimmy's speech about Vietnam and war and life, he doesn't go deep. That's my biggest bugaboo, is that it's not complex at all. We're talking about how Adelaide in the city is dirty and like an open air coffin. Right, a cramped coffin basically, but it doesn't use cramped coffin. He basically says it and then leaves it there. Or a lot of the dialogue, he will say something or how he's feeling, or how a character is feeling, or say a funny line. He's good with dialogue. Sure. The dialogue gets a lot better by... Yeah, absolutely. And the themes get a lot stronger. Again, the bookending themes. He knew very well, you begin with Last Free Man, you end with Grandpa Bob. Families, I think the family farm. A lot of it does have themes that hit, but his batting average... I would say is probably a 5 or a 6. Sometimes you can hit a 7, 7.5, but with wild swings at best. That's what I'd say so far.
I think I do agree to the extent that, and I blame this on the superstructure again, that he hits the same notes again without getting deeper on them. In terms of just I gotta escape from the city's a trap, gotta escape from the city. That's sort of reiterated in very slightly different wording, in 6 or 7 stories as the main punchline. And it's okay, I've heard that before, But again, because you're meeting this character for the first time in a lot of these cases, even if it's a character that's 90% the same, it's hard to leap ahead of that. Which is say, I agree with you.
Because fun fact about Australia, it used to be green. Right, there was part of the Northeast had foliage.
Wait,
and
have you
like
read?
that.
Have you?
But,
has Lewis written a prequel that I haven't read?
Oh yes, no, in the lore. Sorry, in like how Tolkien has like the unfinished Silmarillion. Lewis, he wrote like a sort of Silmarillion. So back in the pre-times, this world of Australia, its version of the Fremen from Dune, like their version of the Fremen, like I think they're called like Abos or Ebus or something like that. The Ebus, they did bush hunting, where you burnt a little piece of forest to get the animals to run away. It's called flushing them out. Real hunters do this. But but they actually ended up burning almost all of the forests down in Australia, in the Northeast, like a couple thousand years ago. At least in the lore, anyway. So this cursed land, right? I'll compare him to Walden and probably later on, but I want to kind of treat him as his own free man at first, freestanding man. Australia, because you see this in the second story with the last horse, right? You learn so much about that's why I said a folk. It's a folkish history of Australia. It was one folk story of a man. Sorry.
Oh, bless you. bless your
yeah,
heart.
Sorry, that was that was a folkish element. Yeah, exactly. It adds a folkish element to it. So, like the horses, right? They used to breed horses to be sent over to India, right? And the reason why he put Jimmy there, right? The veteran. It's also, I didn't like the fact that Jimmy didn't want to shoot the horse. When his whole view on death in the first story was that he wanted to be taken out quickly, he didn't want to let himself die out. Because the second story is all about the horse. You see this water decay. He's drinking out of a puddle, and he thinks it's more moral to let the horse, like, what's the version of starving for water? Like water starve.
You mean dehydrate?
Rather than just shoot it and like peacefully take it out of misery? Yes, dehydrate.
Water
like a
starve.
prune.
I mean, water starved is a fine way to say that something's dehydrating, but it would not be would not be.
Yes.
It would be because I didn't want to say dehydrate twice. Would be the only time I would say water starved.
Yes. Okay. So thank you. Dehydrate, this poor magnificent beast, because you see, Australia is constantly in like kind of attacking its past or haunted by its past. The fires of the past, right? To reference this fictional race of people who burnt down the northwest Australian plains. The Australians come back. They use it for exploitation and colonial. It's a fundamentally colonial place. It's very different from the way American views America. For example, I have Frederick Turner's "The Frontier," which is the thesis of the frontier. That in an American psyche, the frontier, our version of the outback, is a place of opportunity. It's a place of home. We assume it is home. If you look at the population of Australia, they hug the coast. All those populated places, Adelaide, Sydney, Melbourne, they're all hugging the coast.
The coast of the United States
right?
isn't the most populous part either.
True, but there's no sense of fear of our version of the outback.
Yeah,
the
no,
forest.
it's
romantic.
What's
the most
it's not,
lore?
Yeah, it's not a fearful place. It's not the Black Forest of Germany. It's
yes.
It's not a place of. It is not a place of terror.
Right, and you have some romantic figures like Ned Kelly, right, the bandit, but it's a life defined as individual. Australians are kind of the most individual people, more so than Americans, right? Because you see in these if you go into the bush, you're sacrificing. It's a sense of exit over voice, right? You are seen by the society, and these cities are the eyes of the world, right? The ones that hug the coast. If you want to be socialized, you have to hug the coast and be part of the global empire. If you want to truly be a free man, like the protagonist's meeting with Jimmy in the beginning, or the horses, you have to go away from civilization, the bush, right? I'll bring up the Walden point here. I call it cheekily the wool and the wall distinction, right? So you have the wool of Woolston and the wall of Walden. Because if you read, I have Walden's book here. There's a tale to this city where he wrote with his gay friends. And it's all about Melbourne, right? Nothing about anything Australia life. you could write about this in any other city. It's generic as hell. It's about city life. Our unique city life experience trademark, right? Nothing uniquely Melburnian at all about this. In contrast, it's a walled city, right? And compare it to the wool of Woolston. The wool of Woolston is a sheep in the outback. You know, he's a sheep herder. He's eating his little dust. He's covered in shit, but he's free and he's happy and he's being hugged by space. Because every time he talks about the emptiness of the outback, he always says, you know, when you grow up in the suburbs, he sees like all the tourists, their eyes bulge out at the sheer emptiness of the plains. And this is a beautiful point. Yet again, he touches beauty. I don't say he doesn't touch beauty. He just touches with his fingers instead of going all in. Right? The vastness of the plains. And you're hugged by it. And there's a sense of liberating freedom. But there's a sense it will not be shared and it's only experienced by the few. The bushmen, the people who live in the bush out in the center of Australia are the truly authentic Australians, right? Because they don't want to be near the world. For the Australian, the oceans represent the society and the world, right? It's only the bush.
I'm still not sure they call
it's a curse. It's like
Bushmen. I feel like that's more of a South African thing.
Well, listen, this is my fan fiction, all right, of this fictional Fremen race, right? This Dune fan fiction, right? So, it's all about extraction, right? Because look at when he talks about the Roadhouse, right? You have people who want to begin again, like his wife, right? You have people who are just kind of wanderers. You have the gay best friend Jimmy, Justin, right? And he's good. The dialogue gets a lot better by Driftwood. Justin's actually generally a funny gay character. And so, his dialogue really shines or starts getting better at that point. And so you see, it's based on exit from the world. And about addiction, right? The Australian economy, the very founding of Australia is, again, obviously LOL, James Cook, and the prisoners, right? It's a penal colony. I'd say it's a junkie colony, right? The best Australian economy is all about colonialism. It's extracting resources.
Exploitative. There's a theme throughout it of viewing society as sort of this crushing force. And even in the failure, you have this guy who was at the peak of success driving a fucking bus because he wasn't big enough or long enough. It's sort of this ever-present force hunting them down that you can only flee into the bush to escape for a time.
Yes, and I think that was that's like the unique thing. He should have intertwined the criminal element and the roadmap element or the Roadhouse element. Like Clerks meets like No Country and Old Men would have been perfect for this. It's just my metaphor of touching the statue instead of kissing the statue holds on. It's just he touches on these themes and he touches them pretty beautifully at times. But not as much as I would like it.
Do you have any pictures of you kissing the statue for
posterity?
Only in my brain. Listen, no, I do not believe in this hyper-reality bullshit, all right? I went there to experience it. I don't want to see myself experiencing it. I wanted my memory of the nerve ending in my brain to feel it.
So anyway, if we get 3 Patreon subscribers, we're going to put some photos of Gabe kissing a statue up there just for the subs. Just $1 for $1 a month. If 3 people give us $1 a month, you're gonna get some hot Gabe on marble action.
It's a deal.
Reject modernity.
Once we hit $100,
fuck tradition.
Listen, for every $100 we get in Patreon, I'll kiss a tombstone. All right, a very Edgar Allan Poe.
You're gonna ton
right?
it though, right? Like you're gonna really like.
Yeah,
No, of the viewers choosing.
Really romance the stone.
Kiss your grandpa statue. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, you gotta get the earth too, the soil, the topsoil. Absolutely, for full Gothic appreciation.
The soil's a top.
Pound that bottom.
Well, it's the top of the body.
In this room. Only mini-mag guys would get
and technically, I'm actually cucking the dead body, right? Because the dead body has to look up as I basically kiss the earth that's on top of him. So really, I'm cucking the dead.
I think that's a Cannibal Corpse song. I want to cuck.
I would actually listen to Cannibal Corpse.
The dead?
Fucking bass.
What else did I have? I did want to do, what should we name this segment? Stinkers and Dinkers, Statues and Matches, like top story, bottom story, things that work for you guys. I don't know if you want to,
Oh yeah, top and bottom, like
no.
the interior and the
bottom.
exterior.
Yeah, those are that's definitely the definition that people would go for. Sure, yeah. For me, I really thought that I really like the opening sort of duet that featured Jimmy Healy, the elderly, grizzled Australian, and I really like the themes there of the lonely grave and the last Brumby. Possibly because in my real country, Mustangs do have a lot of evocative themes about them. As another wild breed of horse. So that was very directly intelligible to me. And I really liked Tracy's lament, the one about the, survivor's guilt of leaving your fuck up friends. I thought that those were very strong, and I think that if Lewis can focus on hitting those kinds of notes in his future and hopefully longer form writing, that is stuff that could be extremely successful, really meaningful, and it's certainly something that I would love to read.
Yeah, he has to learn structure, because the Last Free Man is mostly entirely structureless from an actual sense, and go deeper. Here, I'll read a quote I actually underlined. If this is from the protagonist, this is, I think, from Driftwood. I've known plenty of people who were poverty-stricken nobodies in the city, who came out bush, made a life for themselves and pretended they were locals. Like all those years being on the bottom of the shit pile in the city never happened. Truth be told, I've done it myself. I don't see what's so bad about it either. If you have the brains and balls to get out from under and make a better life to yourself, I say you've earned the right to forget the years of misery that preceded it. Mm-hmm. And that's basically kind of like the blurb to kind of justify the whole theme of the book itself, really.
Yeah. I mean, that's the mission statement, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't go any further with that. That's the problem. Especially with the speech in the first page, there's kind of like a reading dissonance. For him, it's very meaningful, but for the reader, you're left wanting. Setup is good, right? He sets up the the sea of nothingness, the sea of the plains. You're supposed to have a deep speech and meaning with this old elderly man, the free man versus the semi-free man. Right, and his beautiful speech about life and war and individuality and dying and living, the sense of poetic. He's a tough, rugged bastard, but he still has a slight yearning for the poetic, right? The crows looking at his grave. Or also with the horse, the former free horses, right? He used to run free in the Australian plains, filled with water. Now the water is decayed, much like the plains and the horse tribes itself.
I was just going to say, I thought he missed an opportunity. I know it's not his writing style, but I mean, Corncob McGillicuddy made an entire career talking about sunsets. I feel like he could have squeezed in some more of that romantic language, or just a touch of it. I've never been to Australia, but I've been to a similar place in the American West, and it's like a very alienating, stunning landscape, and it does affect you mentally. And I just feel like some of that could have been played into the theming you're talking about, and digging deeper into Gabe, but not necessarily going all in on a different writing style. I think it could have helped.
Oh no, he can keep the writing style. He can definitely keep the dialogue heavy. I'm not asking for proofs. I'm asking for prose. He's not good at prose. He's good at dialogue. He's good at character. He's good at touching.
I'd say his prose is solid, but it's simple. He does not do a lot of really exaggerated flourishes. It's very it's workmanlike to an extent.
Yeah, a good example of it is actually this when he describes Adelaide. After the wide open spaces of the Nullarbor, the city felt cramped and dirty. I caught up with some people I'd known, and they were doing the exact same thing they had been doing when I left Adelaide years ago. I realized then that this isn't so much a city as an above-ground cemetery. Right? And see, he touches on something, a very good idea. Right? For him, the city, the socialized life, is a coffin. Right? You're only alive out there in the bush, or out there in the roadhouse, or in the road. Even the road itself is a romantic object in this. But the city is containment. You feel contained. He feels contained. And he touches on the subject, but you can tell he's feeling it, but you don't feel how constrained the city is, how dirty the city is, how it feels trapped. You can tell the protagonist is trapped, but you yourself as the reader do not share this experience with him.
Yeah, it's explanatory rather than experiential writing, which it aids it in being very efficient and fast, but it doesn't leave you the vivid experience for a lot of those things you described. And it kind of plays into my top picks. I agree with everything you guys said. I think I liked all the ones you guys said. I'll mention my two I didn't like, but in addition, I would add Driftwood for the reasons mentioned. Just great dialogue. It had kind of an uplift, like it was a change in tone, like generally a positive, which was a kind of a nice kick.
And the ending was so sincere. It would have been corny by any author, but he means it so much with that ending.
No, yeah, it's fantastic. That's why I was like, this should be like, later in the book probably. But and then the other one that hit me, I think because of the things you guys were just talking about, is The Exile, which is the one about the elderly woman whose daughter's leaving, her husband's dead. Because I think that one actually digs a little bit deeper into the themes of, this woman that kind of like, quote unquote, made it out, had a family, made the connections, and then all of a sudden, through the sands of time, the pressures of the passage of time, she's kind of ending up abandoned and alone yet again. And she's sort of asking herself, what was it all worth? Like, to me, that one actually stuck with me, even though it was a one-off character. I felt like it touched deeper on the subject that all the other stories we're talking about. A lot of them, like I mentioned before, just kind of hit the same, couple of lines about need to escape and things like that. Then my two stinker awards, the two I didn't like, Bottle Brush Tree and Rain on the Highway. Bottle Brush Tree is the one about, it's like a 3-pager about an old guy in hospice care who like sits by a tree. And it's like, okay, whatever.
Very wistful, yeah.
Yeah, and then Rain on the Highway, I wrote that down. I actually can't remember what it was about now. I think, is that the one about the guy who pees? No, that's the farm one. What is Rain on the Highway even about?
I don't know.
Oh, it's a guy who sees the chick, and she's like in the bar.
That's the problem. That's the problem.
Yeah, nah. And he's like, oh, I need to get out of the bush. And that one kind of epitomizes the problem of like repeating the same like thing. Like, okay, I get it. You want to escape. You want to get out to bush. Yeah, nah. So those are my two stickers.
But that's a strong theme. What he needs is an editor, right? If you take like redrafted versions of the first 2 stories, Driftwood, The Exile, Family Farm, Grandpa Bob, maybe 2 more stories, a short story collection of 6 or 7 short stories, patch up the ones I mentioned, you can have a very, very strong story collection of decay and being used and just being left a husk, like a junkie, right? Like the horses that are bred, or like the land of Australia itself. Both of exile and wanting to leave and escape, but also being left, leaving and being left as well. If he kept those stories, shortened it down, there's way too many stories. There's too much fat between the juicy bits where he's really good at. You could easily shorten this down to 6 or 7 stories, and it would hit a lot easier and a lot better.
I don't think you'd even have to cut as much. I think it's just reordering, and I think maybe like making really superficial changes to make a consistent name, consistent character, and and maybe and cut out maybe 3 or 4 of the fat, and then reinsert like some of the throwaway one-off characters. You could merge them. I don't know. Yeah, I agree. If I could get my hands on as an editor, you do my fan fiction, or someone else could work with more experience, I think he could do a novel. And also, I think he might find more people to read it, because more people, let's face it, weirdos read short story collections. We're all weirdos here. Normal people read novels. So
listen, I am a quirky king, all right? Art hoes love me.
Yes.
Yeah. There's no doubt about that. Well, the quirkiness, the statue love.
So you would, if you saw that statue and you just finished reading this biography of Dostoevsky in this beautiful ancient library, right? This husk of something so beautiful, and you see the graveyard, it's sunset, your phone's about to die, you're in a foreign city, a foreign land, Boston, right? It was so perfect, it was so beautiful, right? But also to your point,
You were swept up in the
more connective
in
tissue.
the moment. You sexually assaulted that statue.
Yes, I was swept in the moment. No, he wanted it. All right, he's Greek. All right,
was
he
a
wants
guy.
it. All right.
Gay
Absolutely.
Pygmalion.
No, because it was this beautiful youth male. It's like, Nietzsche says about Plato. If there was no beautiful boys in Athens, Plato would never written a single line, right? And there was this beautiful rejuvenation, right? So you're in a land of decay. Boston is a land of decay. The Northeast is a land of decay. You're in a library, an ancient tomb to literature and the culture of the West, in a graveyard, in a basement. And you see this beautiful young Faustian figure, the Western man, capital W, Western man, the peak vitality, peak youth, pure pale marble, looking out to the sunset. It was the perfect moment for that.
So basically,
to the actual subject matter,
if you're in Boston and Gabe's in the library, don't let your son go to the basement. It's what you're saying.
No.
Yeah,
listen,
I bet Plato quote.
No,
quote.
No, he's like my age. Listen, if your son's probably filled with estrogen and seed oils. You're it's not worthy of romantic connection. It's not a youth. It's not an Athenian youth, a man of 20, looking bold as sunrise, the wine dark sunset. But to the sunset of Australian society, to connect it back, right?
You keep digging this hole deeper and then pretending like the ladder's getting taller. So
yes. Listen, I'm adding boners to the lines of the ladder. All right, to climb up on. It's a cemetery, bones, my dick, the marble statue. It was an
Strong
asexual.
theming.
If you like the concept of a boner
exactly.
ladder, you are going to love the book that we are covering after this next one.
The Last Free Man. Oh, wait, no. Wait, no, what we're doing this one? Millennium next, I think? I didn't finish my Spengler seminar. I had 2 parts. The first part of the Spengler thing and the second part, Australian civilization. And it's sincere. When I compared him to Walden, I didn't do it for the memes. I did it as a genuine distinction between the cosmopolitan and the real. And he does really good with that. That's his strongest thing, actually. When he hits the sentimental of freedom, dirty, sheep freedom, but true freedom nevertheless. You're not stuck in the coffin. Yes, no, he means it sincerely. He talks about, sheep shit of the roadhouse, right? But he loves the sheep shit, right? He talks about it disparagingly, but it's better than the cosmopolitan coffin of Adelaide or Sydney or any other southeast of Australia. And I really like those parts. It opens and ends with sincere Australians, the last free Australians, the last man of Australians. And it's bookended by fuck-ups and trying to live the life of the cosmopolitan only to reluctantly go to a sincerely Australian man. Well, you're not born into it. Yet again, it's difference between people who are born Australian and people who convert to the lifestyle, like his wife, right? Or the friend of his wife. She's a bogey whore, and she becomes a trad wife in the bush. You know what I mean? But you're accepted because that's the whole point of the bush. It's a land of exit. But no, I was going to compare it to Russia too, because it reminded me. When I said the Australian archipelago, I was going to reference. It's a positive version. Instead of camp guard stepping on your balls, you knock up a girl and you end up in the sheep station. Right? It's a positive version. The Russian has St. Petersburg. The Russian has Moscow. But all of major Russians they hug Europe. Siberia and the Eastern Russia is purely colonial. It's half sincere civilization, half colonial exploitation. Australia, it's a rim of civilization, but because Australia was actually founded 12 years after America's 1776, 1780, right? It's a young civilization. And, Britain was already in decay. They were the last summer of the empire. So they no longer have the Faustian spirit of the Anglo-Saxon, right? But the sincere Australian, unlike the American, the Americans found their home in the frontier. The settlement is considered a very cheery, go-lucky, happy thing, while the frontier of Australia is very brutal. It's a purely Darwinian process, right? The selection pressure of living as a sheep. Yet again, the wool distinction. You must be a hard as nails fucking billy goat to live in the bush. But if you are strong enough, you can basically handle anything and you live a good life. And fundamentally, when you go back to civilization, the connections are vast, but deep as a puddle. As the last horse drinks. But you appreciate all the connections more in the bush. It's a selection process. It's an evolutionary thing. This cursed maiden, right, who lost her hymen long ago, right, is fundamentally cursed land that's constantly exploited and in process of decay and renewal and being used. But if you hold on to it, if you accept the curse and you live with the curse, you will live in a deeply, deeply profound experience by living with this curse and be enriched by it. That's basically the overall theme of Australian fiction and the Australian ethos, the telos of Australian civilization itself. And the thing is, you can never have an inland civilization. There's no community in the bush. It's it's inherently tribal, be it Aboriginal or the white man, you know what I mean? It will still be a cluster of archipelagos of tribes, never a true civilization. It's a patchwork of knits of individuals. Because, this is also one positive thing I'd like to say, you said this in response to me, is that he tells you the experience, he's reciting the experience, but you don't experience it with him. That's kind of the entire point of the book. Like Grandpa Bob, the beginning of that story, he talks about Grandpa Bob will never have a biography. He didn't light the world on fire, but this pages on this book will be the closest thing you ever have to a biography. You know what I mean? He's kind of the speaker of the dead, or speaker of these pockets of individuals of Australia who would not give a damn. The coast fears them. Right? But it's true in thematic sense, right? The whole point of Speaker of the Dead, if I remember correctly, you talk about the good, the bad, and try to be sincere as humanly possible. For him, he's the speaker of the Australian dead. The junkie and the colonialist are fundamentally the same thing. You excess as much as you can, and you break down, and you have to live with the shell of that excess. You know what I mean? The horse, the herd of the horses come back down to the dehydrated camel drinking out of a puddle. And he could have done a lot more of that angle, but he touches it just enough to make you feel it, in my sense. If we give number scores, I'd say he does hit the 7 mark. It's all I used the real number, the whole 9 being or 8 being average is retarded, right? 7 is good. 7 is really good.
Did you have any other thoughts, Dave?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I gave my top 3, my two I didn't, and yeah, really the main thing I wanted to pull you guys in on was my conspiracy to talk him into writing his future books as a novel, because actually, maybe I should turn to you. You've read the sequel, without going into, or not the sequel. You read his next book. I know it's another short story collection, right? So does it have a similar vibe?
It is not as set in the bush. Mm-hmm. It expands on,
it's a drug culture oriented one, right?
What small towns are like, and what it's like to be a junkie in this mystical, magical land of Australia. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it really is kind of an expansion on the first half of the Tracy's Lament story kind of setting.
Is it a tighter time span and tighter set of characters?
It is similar in the sense that there are recurring themes of, especially the protagonist being very much a stand-in for apparently for Lewis himself, and there are some stories that reference people more than once, but it's structured very similarly. I'd say that there's fewer retreads than there are in Last Free Man. each of the stories kind of does its own thing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested. I think I will read it eventually. I'm not rushing.
I would say I think that his other collection, Remembering the Dead, is better than The Last Free Man.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is more mature and overall better. But I think that some of the standouts that are in this one are really, really very good.
Mm-hmm. I do want to be careful that we don't come across as overly negative, because it's easy just to jump in with, this one stunk. This, I wanted more theming, or not enough theming, blah blah. But I would say, in terms of percentage-wise, like the number of stories that I thought were like really strong or were just pretty good, I'd say the vast majority were very good. And then there was probably the first two, I'd say like a third of them I'd say were like excellent, and then the rest were really good. And then there was like 3 or 4 okay ones, and then 2 or 3 that were just very blah. So in terms of another thing with it being short stories, you don't have that momentum to keep you going in between. So sometimes you have a slow chapter in a book, it doesn't give it a black eye the way it unfairly can with a short story collection, because you're thinking about, I can't wait to get back to the main action. I can't wait to get to this scene. Where in a short story, each story has to stand up on its own, which can make it a little bit more. I think they get graded harsher.
Yeah, I think that is true. But that said, also a short story collection is theoretically a little easier to write than a novel that's consistent. So
maybe this is, I think, something we disagree on, Gabe, because I was saying I thought a third of these stories were very good to excellent. A third were like pretty good to goodish, and then there was sort of a third. The final third was a couple mehs, and then 2 or 3 just stinkers. Is that comparable to your overall view of it?
I'd say there's 3 or 4 that are great. That are generally good quality, or not quality. There's 4 that are great, a handful that are majority that are solid, and then just a few that did nothing to me. I think overall I'd agree. I'd say 40%. I'm not good at math, so like 40%. No, sorry, more like 33% is good. 23 is meh, and then like 44 is... No, sorry, 23 is solid, the other one is good, and then 43 is meh.
Okay. So like a fourth, and like the other kind of like 50, half is kind of eh.
Yeah. Overall, I think the same measurements you did, I'd say I'd solidly agree with you. The best parts are obviously the roadhouses, the archipelago roadhouse experiences, the stuff to do with attachment and decay. Not plot-based. None of the plots really do well. It's very sentimental. Like I said, it's very much like a song. That's why I used the CD metaphor earlier. This guy is playing a My Chemical Romance album in front of you in a party, slightly drunk and tipsy. And if you relate to that kind of thing, it works really well. I relate to it. That's why overall I respond very good. I responded very well to that kind of ending of him playing the... Again, that was the strongest emotional... I think I agree with you. When you said that Driftwood should be the end, I kind of disagreed with you at first. But then when you kind of see... You start with The Last Free Man, the old, the rugged, the decayed, and the corrupted youth, right, who try to experience some sense of purity. Them driving into the bush as the suburbs thin away, playing Smiths. I actually do kind of think that would have been a better ending than... Grandpa Bob is a solid one, but I kind of agree with you.
Yeah, it would have been bittersweet.
So overall, I think we both generally agree on what the best parts of this novel is. The sincerely sentimental. I don't mean sentimental as a criticism. The best parts of this novel are sentimental. It's just that, yet again, thin out. Just like, the suburbs thinning out to the bush, he needs to thin out to the good stuff, right? Sentimental, dialogue, character, more details of characters. Because the protagonist kind of reminds me of a Wojak. On one of my notes, I put Wojak, just Wojak. The basic Wojak, none of the flavored Wojaks. Actually, the OG Wojak, the everyday man. You know what I mean? This sense of relatability to the it's mimetic. He's a meme. He's a template. So, I would want more meat on the bones of all the characters, more in-depth dialogue, conversations, more characterizations, rather than finger painting a beautiful like airsoft painting. I kind of want a little bit more detail. I'm a prose fag, right? But detail, especially, I think, is something he can definitely do. It's in his capacity, right? He's not a structuralist, but he can definitely be a much more detailed author in his own strong suits.
Yeah, I agree.
Same. Captain, did you have any final thoughts that you can have a chance to share?
Feel like you and I covered that before while Gabe was off
Prowling the graveyard.
Prowling the graveyard for the hottest monuments.
Listen, I was cracking my rat to the memories, all right?
God bless him.
God.
All right. Well,
Yeah, y'all kept on poking in my past, just like the protagonist in this novel. All right.
The real deep lore is the lost, for anyone that listens this long, the lost episode, the second half of Mixtape Hyperborea, where Gabe talks about stinky ears on women for like 10 minutes. We lost that.
Oh, listen.
We lost
That
that?
wasn't stinky.
Well, I have it. It's just so it's
we lost it?
unlistenable. Maybe I'll salvage it and find a way.
I mean, it was unlistenable when I heard it the first time. So, I don't know how the recording is.
Cheeto ear
But-
bitches.
Is that strange? Y'all never fucked a stinky bitch before? She wasn't even particularly stinky. It's just when you read Mixtape Hyperborea, she smells like, what, peaches? Like, I never fucked a peach-smelling bitch. I'm sorry.
Damn, dude, you're missing out. Get that
Bro.
cherry gloss lips. Ooh, baby.
Bro, buy your woman some I don't know, fucking Irish Spring, whatever the fuck it
Get
takes.
some Old Spice in there.
Irish
Anything.
Spring.
Yeah, you need the hard stuff. Fucking get some Lysol. Fuck.
Yes, Old Spice.
I don't know how
That's the hard
how
stuff.
nasty you need to be for your ears to stink. That's unforgivable.
Listen. Fuck me.
Not even
I
any of these like Australian truck stop hoes that Lewis lists have stinky ears.
Dude, can you imagine the lot lizards at a fucking roadhouse? It's gotta be brutal. I mean,
Dear God.
just dry heat. The skin's gotta be like leather.
Imagine the smell.
I shan't.
Sheep smelling bitches.
See, but that's a sincere erotic instead of this mass cosmopolitan, sweet-smelling illusion of shampoo. You get the authentic, dry, dirt bush pussy. Right out in the bush, you get the sweat. You get the pits. It's the distinction between the Wall of Walden to Melbourne, right? The cosmopolitan city. That's not Australia. It's a colony. The cities are still colonies of Australia. The authentic Australia is in the bush. Right? You gotta go deep into the bush. You gotta smell the pits.
Literally and figuratively. You gotta
Exactly.
go deep into the bush to see the real Australia.
He's a bush cat,
It's a
absolutely. He's got great taste.
Stanky. So you're saying the real Australia is a really stanky hoe.
Yes, but listen, she's a workhorse.
All right. Well, that's the tagline. That's going on in the liner notes for this show. The real Australia is an incredibly fragrant prostitute.
Yes, but a real workhouse of a woman. She's a workhorse, man.
The last Maduro Brumby.
Yeah, it's an old horse of a bitch.
A real steady stag of a woman.
I'm sick